All right. I believe that we are all live. I hope so. If people who are here, if you can say, if you can see us, if you can hear us. I think that it's live, so hopefully it's all fine, and people will be able to hear us. So what I'll do first is just say welcome to everyone who have joined, who are joining, and who will be joining this evening, and who may be watching this later, tomorrow, the next day, whenever you might be watching. Just some very quick introductions. Zoe says that she can see us, so that's wonderful. I'm Sky from Escape the City, and we are here to host this evening to talk about how to get into a purposeful career. And we've got some really amazing speakers and career changers here to share their stories with you and their advice now from being individuals who work with purposeful organizations and having a sense of what that looks like and kind of how to make the move yourself. So a little bit about me and what we're here for this evening. I will pass it over to Jake to say hello. Jake is my colleague from Escape, and he'll do a little intro of himself, and then we'll move on to welcoming our speakers.
Thanks, Sky. Yeah, my name's Jake. I joined Escape City in January. I used to work in asset management, so I very much kind of escaped the city to work for Escape the City. I've been around for 9 months, and I work mainly on the account management and business development side. But really excited to hear from our main speakers tonight. So I'll pass the mantle over to Hannah to introduce herself.
Hello, I am Hannah Casey. I am the co-lead of the On Purpose Associate Programme in London, which is a year-long programme that helps people change career into purpose-driven work, basically. And I did the programme myself 3 years ago and now work at the organisation.
Amazing. Jonathan, you happy to introduce yourself and what you do and kind of how you got there?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Jonathan. So I'm a co-founder of Greater Change, and what we do is we essentially try to help homeless people take large steps out of homelessness by collaborating with other partner charities and, having a huge focus on evidencing, mostly because me and my co-founder are huge stats nerds. What we do is say, if you were experiencing homelessness, one of the things that you will find is that you might face a pretty large barrier on your way out, even if you were, working really hard with your support worker. So what would happen at that point is your support worker would refer you to Greater Change. We would work with you and them, and it's all about sort of building a personalized plan around their aspirations for getting out of homelessness. And so we would then sort of help them put together essentially a financial grant package to help them overcome barriers on their way out. So I was a management consultant for about a year and a half at Newton Europe, and before leaving and working full-time on Greater Change. So yeah, it's just sort of like Jake and Hannah, very much a sort of made it out. So now I'm trying to convince more people to join me, and very much looking forward to just having a chat for the next hour or so. Yeah.
Definitely. That leaves me then. Hello, everyone. I'm Yasmina. I work at Beam. So similar to Jonathan, working on solving homelessness. We're the world's first crowdfunding platform to help people who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And Beam is an innovative tech startup. We're also an employability and housing service for the people, the beneficiaries that work with us, as well as being an ethical recruitment company. So working closely with employers who want to diversify their workforces. That's the part of the business that I lead. So I work in the Beam Recruit team, very much thinking about how we can work with employers, how we can mainstream ethical recruitment and diversity inclusion initiatives. My background is in recruitment and diversity and inclusion. So most recently was managing the graduate recruitment team at a Magic Circle law firm. So recruiting lots of people into trainee lawyer roles. So definitely quite a big jump now into the role I'm in, but definitely learn a lot that I've been able to bring into this role. And yeah, excited to be able to talk about what I've learned from the corporate setting and how I've incorporated it into my role now. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
Amazing. So everyone's had a really interesting interesting and different journey to where you are now and working on really interesting challenges. Everyone from Hannah, obviously, now helping other people to make a shift, and Jonathan and Yasmina, obviously, both of you working to support people into, both working to support people in different ways into changing their lives and changing their circumstances, which is really, really interesting, different. I'm so curious about the differences in people's opportunities and how those things all work and how we can make change. I guess we'll do the first, we'll hop into the first questions. I'll ask you the first question for each of you. But I guess one question that I have for each of you is kind of, when you were making a change, this is, you know, I guess each of you worked, you know, we have Hannah from media, Yasmina working in Clifford Chance, Jonathan working as a consultant. I feel like there's kind of a perception in the world around working in impact and kind of working and having a purposeful career around this idea that you have to sacrifice a lot in order to do that. You know, I think often, particularly if you're working in corporate or in some sort of, you know, more of a high paid environment, that there's got to be a big salary drop, you know, there's a big sacrifice, it takes ages, there's kind of a moral tax that you have to pay as well. And I'm just curious, for all of you, really, if that's something you've experienced or what you would say to that, because that's something certainly that I hear a lot, and Hannah, potentially you hear that as well, people coming into that space. So Jonathan, maybe I see you nodding along with me, so I'm just curious what your experience is, and then I'd be curious what everybody's thoughts are about that.
Yeah, I mean, we get that sort of not infrequently, you know, have people commenting on social media being like, how much is your CEO paid? How much is CEO paid? And I think there's this expectation that, you know, if you work in the not-for-profit sector, that, you know, you just shouldn't be paid that much. And it's interesting you use the term moral tax there, because you might almost say it should be the opposite, right? And a moral tax should be imposed on those who work in perhaps less ethical industries. But we seem to have this hang up in society where it's the other way around. And now I'm not saying that I think people should be paid exorbitant amounts in our industry, but I think it's really, really difficult for us to have to sort of juggle those expectations that people have, which is that, you know, if you, that you shouldn't be paid that much. And then at the same time, try to compete at recruiting the kind of talented people that we need to recruit in order to grow our organization and solve the problem. You know, like, yes, I'm so glad Yasmina's here with me, because it's kind of like homelessness is not an issue that either one of our organizations are going to solve by themselves, right? I mean, because we just don't have enough resources yet devoted to the space. So, you know, a part of that resource, I mean, you know, and just my personal feeling coming out of consultancy was just that, like, probably one of the largest sort of, it's almost criminal how many people get into law, banking, and consultancy in this country. It's just, and how much talent is basically just stuck in those organizations. Not that, you know, they're not doing cool, fun, interesting things, but that ultimately, you know, that deprives other markets and industries as well of that talent. You know, especially in the consultancy space, you always see like companies hiring consultants in almost basically as temp workers, and then when they leave, projects, you know, very rarely, let's be honest, very rarely hold together when the consultants leave, right? And the reason's just because, you know, there's not enough sort of drive, resource, talent left in the organization to continue things on. And it would just seem very silly and upside down to me at the time. So yeah, sorry, I went on a long rant there, but I completely agree that it's a thing that we do face. But I think it is at the same time a stigma that is slowly disappearing. So, you know, having to very seriously confront that and be very clear about our philosophy is sort of how we've been sort of, you know, talking to donors or anyone like that, right? To say, look, you know, we're not going to pay people a horrible wage, because that's not what we're about. We want to be a good employer. You know, it just wouldn't work if our employees are at risk of homelessness themselves. Yeah, I think it's something that we have to just always constantly have to push back on as employers in the industry.
I think part of the key as well is choosing a career to change into a role that you're going to go for that doesn't make you feel like you're making any sacrifices. I know that when I was, I didn't actually proactively look. I was contacted by the CEO who I had known for a couple of years. And he got in touch and said, look, there's a role I think would really suit you. And I did a lot of research, and I'd followed Beam for about 3.5 years before I decided to make the move and even enter the recruitment process. And I'd seen the way that they were growing. I'd seen their business model. We're a social enterprise. We're not a charity. And so that means we're able to get, significant amounts of investment, which means that we can grow the number of people that we support. And so when I was making my decision, I looked at the trajectory of the company and I said, okay, even if in this circumstance I might have less pay, will I have share options? The answer with Beam was yes, I will have share options, which interlinks the success of the company with the success of, the number of people we're helping and with me and my motivation. And also the tons of other things to do with culture, to do with fulfillment, to do with development opportunities that you get when you move into a different type of organization that you can't always get in a corporate. And so I think when you're weighing up, should I be moving? Should I not? Should I take this quite scary leap? It's all about finding the organizations that really speak to what you need at that time in your life and, the commitments you have in your life, whether it's a mortgage or children or whatever it might be, and making sure that you balance the sort of basic needs with development and with happiness and what's going to make you feel fulfilled at work. So I think it's all about finding that balance.
Yeah, and just to build on that, so on Purpose, we run a year-long program where people that are looking to transition to get to work in 2 different organizations. So we get to see quite a broad perspective of organizations working in purposeful ways. And there is a broad range of different types of career dependent on your budget and your needs that you can explore. You've got things like impact investing. You've got even, a lot of companies looking to change from within now and be more purpose driven. And so you really need, you can think about what you need or what type of organization is right for you when you're moving into the impact sector. But I think the other thing is it's, for me personally, I came from advertising and I was earning, relatively good money. I did take a pay cut to join the program, but I was just so miserable. I just, just not doing something that I felt was making a difference was just became too much of a cost in the other direction. And I think you really have to balance that.
Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, all of those insights from all of you. I think it's probably one of the biggest things that I would say the sector faces in terms of a challenge of, as Jonathan, as you said, like we need really smart, talented, capable, dynamic people fixing the big problems in the world. And I do always think it's really interesting that it's, we pay people working in certain sectors so much money, whereas people who are actually making a huge difference in the world can find that really challenging. But I do think that, from the data, like it is changing. You don't have to be in a really bad financial situation in order to do work that's purposeful and has a meaning. Like that is changing with, as you say, social enterprises, even charities pushing back of like, what's the standard of living we want for our teams? Also people like B corporations, all of these things have really changed what's possible, which I think is really always very good to keep in mind. Yeah. Jake, I think you've got the next, hand that over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we're diving more into the topic questions now on getting into a purposeful career and for our audience in particular, how to be an excellent candidate, which I guess is something that you 3 would have gone through, or I guess Jonathan to a lesser extent as a co-founder. But we were curious about what are some common mistakes I think that you see from applicants applying to roles at your company, and that can be sort of misaligned expectations around compensation, which we've just talked about. But yeah, any common mistakes that you see from applicants?
So we recruit about 40 people a year to come on our program. So we're doing roughly a year around 140 interviews for the program. I think a common mistake that people make is underselling or underthinking through their drive to join the purpose-driven sector and what's really driving them. I think being really, really clear on that. I don't think it's for our program anyway. It's not necessarily important exactly where you want to go, but being clear about why you want to make the change. For us as an organisation, why this organisation, why now, and having done your research about us. I think maybe another. It comes to mind because I had an interview recently. Another one is just maybe, I think in the impact driven space, there's a lot fewer egos, and we don't see too much of that because most of the people want to come for the right reasons. But just, I guess making sure that you're being humble and enthusiastic and all of those good things. I would encourage you to be. Maybe not so much of the hard sell that you need to do in maybe traditional like corporate jobs. I don't know if anyone else has got anything to add to that.
I was just going to say that that's such a good point about, impact investing in general and the impact sector, just having some of the nicest people ever. I've never met a single person that wasn't happy to just share. There's no like secret sauce like Coke formula that they're hiding in the back room and they're not letting loose. So I think that's definitely a huge point to approach that in a sort of very open way. I think probably the most difficulty we've had in terms of recruitment is certainly sort of what you were alluding to, Hannah. It's like, I think some people come in with a lot of baggage where, the work environment might basically require that you try to create your own territory, right? You built your own kingdom within the company and you don't want people to encroach on it. And it starts to become this very like almost a bit toxic, take things very personal kind of way. And I think, that's probably the biggest thing is to sort of leave that at the door, that I've seen. But otherwise, in another way, it's kind of like also just feel free to take more ownership. Like there's no, well, at least at our organization and I guess at most early stage startup-ish organizations, it's very much like, don't wait for someone to tell you yes, right? Just go do it. If you need to go dig into this spreadsheet, like just go, don't wait for someone to hand that to you. So again, I'm sure like the thing is that everyone has so many skills applying to us sometimes, right? It's like you have the right skill set. They're just not somehow like hesitant to use it. And so sort of, flipping that switch is probably also quite important. But yeah.
I would add two things to that as well. The first one is when you're looking at where you're applying, it's really making sure you understand the business model and their values, because that's how you're going to be able to demonstrate how you will make an impact and identify what your transferable skills are and how you can really change the way that they work or add to their existing model. I think that's really important. And the second is always seeing every recruitment process as a two-way thing, because, I think we're going to get on to talking about recruitment processes. Sometimes they are long and tough. And I definitely, with mine, saw it as an amazing opportunity to understand whether this is a role that I would like, that I would thrive in, that I would be able to add value to. And it completely changed how I framed the way that I thought about it and the way that I went into the process, because I knew that this was a two-way thing. And I think when you're a career changer and perhaps you're a little bit nervous about applying these skills to a completely new environment, you just need to remember it's as much about you figuring out if you want to be there and if they're going to suit who you are as a person as the other way around.
It's really good. It really strikes me that last point. I mean, obviously, all of the points have been are just so helpful for people to think about getting that mindset of, demonstrating your passion, your care, your sense of understanding of what it is, but really also seeing that as a two-way process. There's so many people that I speak to who think, oh, well, I got rejected, or, oh, they didn't want me, I wasn't good enough. And it's like, well, did you enjoy talking to them? Did you actually like the process? Like, what was that like for you? It's such a good, I always think recruitment processes are a really good way of understanding what an organization is like, and do you see yourself there? Is that something, and kind of it being less about you're being rejected, it's like, do you really want to be, I guess part of that's a confidence thing, which is harder when you're a career changer, and it does feel a bit intimidating, but it's such a good reminder. I guess along the vein of people doing things a bit differently, and perhaps Jonathan, your point around being proactive and kind of using the tools that you have in your toolbox to your advantage. I know at Escape we talk a lot to people about creating opportunities for themselves, going out there and being very proactive about it. Not always relying on, despite the fact that we run a job board, not always relying on a job board in order to find the opportunity, but being more proactive and creating opportunities for yourself, which is actually how I got my job at Escape. There wasn't a job advertised. It was being proactive, seeing an opportunity, reaching out, having conversations, proving value. And I'm curious if any of you have either employed somebody who didn't apply directly to a role, and if so, like, what did they do that was impressive that other people can learn from? Because I do think that the purpose space, the impact space can be difficult to get into if you don't know people, for example. Or if you've done that yourself and what you did to kind of make a space for yourself. So I don't know if anybody wants to share their insights there. Yasmina, you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So yeah, how I got hired is probably quite a good example of this. So in 2018, when Beam will have been about 6 months old, I think at the time, I met the CEO. So I invited him in actually to talk at an event, a conference that I was running at the law firm I used to work at, because he was alumni. He actually had trained there. And I went through our alumni list to look for people who were doing interesting things. And I organized a session called Tech for Good. I invited him in, I opened the event, I did a little bit of intro to why he was speaking. And then we stayed in touch from that point onwards on LinkedIn. We followed each other's updates. And then when a role came up, he messaged me at one point. I was like, not now. Then he messaged again about a year later, and we got in touch. And from that point onwards, I entered the recruitment process, and I really enjoyed it. And I clearly have ended up at Beam. But the thing that really stood out for me there was the power of actually LinkedIn and keeping in touch with people in your network and following the causes and the work that you find interesting. At the moment, you're probably, if you're working in a big corporate, there might be pro bono partners that you work with, or every now and again, you volunteer for a couple of hours a month or a quarter with organizations that you feel passionate about. Always keep in touch with those people, and sometimes reach out and ask for an update on what's going on there, or get a coffee in the diary. I've definitely had people do that with me as well. And I actually helped to hire my replacement from the last job that I left. And she was someone who'd reached out to me on LinkedIn, who I knew from the industry. And, she has gone into a role in that team. And again, that came from being really proactive, from getting in touch. And so I think, always just keeping abreast of the things you're interested in and making a concerted effort.
I think I just completely agree with Yasmina. I think it's very much like I think nowadays there are, especially with remote working, there are a lot of opportunities to sort of contribute whilst you are still working in your current job. So it's almost treated a bit like an investment to say, I'm going to invest a bit of time now. I'm not looking to switch now, but, if I invest a little bit of time now into doing something good, I mean, firstly, that's good in itself, right? Because you're producing, really decent impact. So that's, even if nothing comes out of it other than just that, that's already great. But then also on top of that, that's just a great way for you to, start to build the network and the contacts. I think nowadays it's like so easy, right, to create, to look for these opportunities. You have Escape, you have, Hannah's platform on Purpose. You have most HR departments nowadays in most large corporate companies create these opportunities for their employees as a part of the retention. Right, to sort of lower attrition rates, and so take part in that, right? Just invest the time to sort of throw yourself in there for a little while, and that's just the right way to start. And yeah, I mean, I was going to say, actually, Sky, your own story is probably worth telling, isn't it? I just think that's always worth the time to do.
And I guess I'd just briefly say, for On Purpose, because we take so many applications, we don't tend to take people that apply to us via, you have to apply. But once you get on the program, the benefit of the program is you have we've got sort of, I think, 800 people that have been through our program across London, Paris and Berlin. So there's a huge network of people that you have access to. And, lots of people that I went through the program with, took the time across the year to have like coffees every week, to have informational interviews, to really build their network throughout the sector. So I definitely agree that it's worthwhile doing. And I'm sure when I look to move on, I'll be tapping up my contacts within the Fellows Network as well.
Definitely. I don't know. I definitely don't want to talk about myself, because I'm the least interesting of everybody on this panel. I can share my story another time. Other than, I'll just say I reached out to Escape on Twitter because I thought what they were doing was really great, and I was running something called Startup Britain at the time, and I thought maybe we could amplify what Escape was doing. I met up with them. They wanted to they were wanting to launch something called the Escape School. And I actually went to visit various empty, derelict pubs in London to see if we could identify a space that would be good for them, etc. And I was basically like just advising them on the side of what they should do. And it was about 18 months later when I decided to leave my job, and I got in touch and said, I've decided to leave my job. I'm going to do something else. And they said, you've got to come and work for us. So that power of reaching out, doing some good, just stuff that you genuinely care about makes such a big difference. It comes across so much to people. And I do think that the best time to be looking for a job is when you're not looking for a job, and to be thinking about planting seeds, having conversations, getting involved with things in the time that you have. And those seeds then some of them will sprout, some of them won't. And actually some of them can lead to things that you'd never expect. But that kind of being proactive and people, projects, etc., makes such a big difference. So anyway.
I'll just plug and say, if you don't have opportunities freely available to you, just reach out to me. We can always use volunteers. So
perfect. Perfect. I'm sure you're going to get a whole bunch of people getting in touch with you about that. But that's really great.
I hope so.
Perfect. Amazing.
And I guess maybe leading on from that, Jonathan, I want to come back to your skill set point as well, because we have so many questions with so many conversations with budding career changers who are a little bit, I guess, lost in terms of direction and how their skills and experience lend themselves to a particular career path or to a particular impact sector. And so I guess I was curious about how often does the person you hire kind of exactly match the skills and experience included in a job advert? We're finding that there's a huge level of imposter syndrome at the moment in the kind of career change space, and that people are often put off by kind of excessively lengthy job descriptions. So really curious about how that kind of maps to reality and the type of people that you then actually do hire.
Yeah, I think so far in our team, no one's sort of come in with the exact right skill set, but they've just learned along the way, because we have a great set of mentors, we have a great board, and they get really, really hands-on in sort of teaching and getting people up to speed. And I would say sort of probably the more important thing is setting yourself up to be a really good learner. And that kind of, I mean, I think that the way I think about it is this, right? I mean, if you've been to uni or to like even just going through high school, if you think about the sheer amount of content you had to digest and learn and then apply in that period of time, really, if you devote, even just 1 to 3 months to learn something alongside work, you're probably going to get like decently good at it, right? Good enough that if you Google it, you can find the answer. That for me is always like the sort of the when you pass the first major hurdle, right? It's like we had someone who joined the team, and he wasn't great with Excel, but he was good enough that he could just Google and learn. I was like, that's enough. Because before you get to that stage, you don't know what to Google. And then when you get the right answer, you don't know how to understand the answer, right? But when you get to the stage where you can just digest answer and teach yourself, that's really the main skill. And I think we basically all have that, especially if you are in, professional services at the moment. It pretty much means that you have some ability to be able to teach yourself some things. And so you don't worry too much about that. Just, make sure you're always updating yourself to stay in touch with that. For example, I don't know. I'm actually, I did PPE at university. So I'm not actually a very STEMmy person, but I did a lot of coding as a kid. And I always think that, having a basic level of coding knowledge is great, because it sort of means that even if you don't know any other languages, you have the core sort of ability to just think in that way. And so I think equipping yourself with the ability to learn, basically, I think is probably the more important thing. I don't know, Hannah, you're the career expert.
I think we are. I would say personally, I've definitely applied and got jobs where I don't meet the entire job spec. I think for On Purpose specifically, we recruit what we call talented generalists. So it is quite a good way of exploring the sector if you're not quite sure where your skills are based. So it's a good opportunity to try out, different types of organization or different types of role. And what we're really looking for when we recruit people is sort of 3 core things, which is like problem solving ability, interpersonal skills, and I guess kind of like organization and project management. And within that, there's a really broad range of people that we look for. But really, I think attitudes and mindsets is, as Jonathan said, is the most important thing, like an ability, a willingness to learn, I guess balancing humility with confidence and questioning things, and just that growth mindset. As as Jonathan said, you can Google most things now in terms of knowledge. So
yeah.
Just
it's almost so cheesy to say, right? I didn't want to say it, but I was just like, I think that's just true. You go on YouTube and you get like tutorials for anything that you want under the sun. So and that's a whole different thing, right? That's really upending the whole sort of university structure. You have so many schools, online schools nowadays, like good ones, that are all about destroying the university model, right? And so yeah, you use them.
Nice. Yasmina, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that. You've obviously done a lot of recruitment, worked in a lot of recruitment. What have you seen to be in this space around people matching the exact experience and skill sets?
I think that people rarely do, to be frank. A job spec is usually a wish list. And I think everyone recruiting for a role knows that they won't hit everything on that list. But what I would advise is always knowing what your superpowers are. Like, what are the things that you really, really do excel on? Once you know what they are and you're like, okay, here are the 3 things from the job spec that I know I can crush and I'm amazing at. If there are a couple of things you're like, I actually haven't got experience in that, really keen to learn, I've done a bit of research, then what you're really good at will always make up for it. And as both Hannah and Jonathan have said, like, attitude is incredibly important, and showing a degree of proactivity. So that there might be stuff that you can't do yet from the job spec, but if you're able to demonstrate how you've been proactive previously, in my last role, I wasn't able to do X, but by the end of it, I was the expert on, using the sum if function on Excel or whatever it might be. Or VLOOKUPs. So long as you can give some examples of where you have developed and grown, then I think that's absolutely fine. And most employers will look for potential. That is the core thing that people are looking for: potential and good attitude.
Great points, and great. I think probably reassuring to people who are watching this and thinking about it, because we did a bit of research not very long ago, and we asked people how likely they were to apply to a job if they didn't meet 100% of the requirements. And I think it was something like 30% of people wouldn't.
Wow.
So, or more. And that's particularly It's particularly relevant with regards to gender. So women are less likely to apply if they don't meet all of the requirements than men, which means that, you know, we're stopping ourselves even at the starting gate. You know, we haven't even made it out the starting gate and already we're behind. And I do think the kind of the lack of confidence maybe that we feel as career changers can hold us back there, because we think, oh, we need to meet everything, or people are going to think that it's random or whatever. And actually, as you say, like, we don't, as employers, as people hiring, like, we don't expect people to meet all of the criteria. Hannah, your criteria for On Purpose of being, you know, talented generalists and having interpersonal skills and being good problem solvers and being able to project manage, like, that's pretty much relevant across any job, any industry, anything. Is if you can relearn how to learn, then those are the people that kind of, you know, that do the best, that excel the most. And it's learning how to learn. It's a skill, and it's something that anybody can teach themselves, and it's being curious, and hopefully that's something that everybody can cultivate, which I think is really helpful reminder, especially for people who are in the space. I also think at the moment, it's worth saying, at the moment, the talent, from a talent market perspective, it's really competitive. So
Yes.
it's easier to stand out than you might think it is, because there are fewer people applying for jobs, there are more jobs on the market, and employers really are struggling to find great people. And so if you are hesitating because you're not sure you meet all the requirements, like, apply anyway, because it's somebody else's job to tell you it's not the right fit. It's not your job to tell yourself it's not the right fit. So I do think that I would encourage people to have a think about that as well. Right, next question. I'm going to actually ask you a question that someone has asked in the question box, which is, as someone just starting to explore opportunities in the impact space, could you recommend good places to go to start more conversations with those in the space and explore opportunities? So if anyone has any recommendations of communities or resources where people can go to kind of have conversations, meet people who are like-minded, that would be great. Anyone has any, feel free to hop in.
So one thing that I am speaking at actually in about 2 weeks' time is Black Tech Fest. So it's all about shining a light on impactful Black people within the tech industry. And there's networking every single morning. Anyone would benefit from coming along because the speakers are amazing and it's a really cool lineup, particularly though if you're a person of color, that might be of interest. So I definitely recommend checking out that, and Color in Tech run that event. They're an amazing platform as well. Because I've only just joined the space, I can't say that I have loads of the like inside goss on networking places, but in terms of where I'd look, like if you look at top 100 startups list, to start doing research on those companies, look at Wired, like top 10 startups in London. Those are the kind of places I'd go to start to get a gauge of the organizations that I wanted to look at, for example, and then go on their websites and look at if they're talking anywhere, if they're going to be at any events that are going to have networking opportunities. That's probably how I'd approach it.
Yeah, I think like events probably, you know, in the last year and a half been quite difficult. In some ways easier, you know, because in the societies that have continued to run them have basically, if it's online, means that it's much easier for everyone to join. Much like today, you know, I have no doubt that there'll be some people who are here now who wouldn't be able to be here if it were an in-person event. So yeah, look out for that. Like, I think, you know, if you go on Eventbrite, you can just like look for events that might just be relevant in spaces that you're interested in joining. You know, I think that just like the easiest way is to just start to get stuck in. Like, if you find an organization that you like, just send an email, you know, offer to volunteer if that's something that you have time to do. Again, as we were alluding to earlier, right? Like, that's something that's really great to do. And then I think it's also just things like, if you're really interested in, say, for example, impact investing, there are actually, you know, brilliant opportunities. I remember I was speaking at the King's College London Impact Investing Society like a year and a half ago. And like they're just open to public. Like you don't have to be a student to be there. And actually, most of the people there weren't. And sometimes it's also like I as a speaker would prefer to have sometimes a portion of the audience that's non-student, because they ask interesting questions that are sort of only coming from people who have experience working in industry, right? So don't exclude yourself from any such spaces. I'd say just go right for it. And Yasmina was saying earlier, and I felt this a lot as someone, again, from a BAME background as well, right? That it felt very often that at BAME events, obviously there are some that are just more appropriately and obviously targeted at BAME audiences. But actually most BAME events and talks, I think, could just be great if you had like, non-BAME people there too, right? I mean, it's not exclusionary. I think it's just sort of get stuck in, email an organization that you love, tell them you want to volunteer, see what happens, right? And if you throw enough spaghetti at a wall, some's going to stick. So yeah.
I guess I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if you apply to On Purpose, then you'll have access to a big network. But failing that, if you check us out on LinkedIn, then you'll be able to see lots of people that have been through our program, most of whom are really happy to be contacted. Just have a big snoop around, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you if you connect with them, or just get in touch with us and we can have a chat.
Nice, really nice. My last piece of advice there is that if you can't find one, make your own. If you're looking for a place to be able to talk to other people who are in the space and you're looking everywhere and you can't find one, then it probably means that there's a need for one, and you could create that, and that could be your route into the impact spaces. Just say, you don't have to say you're an expert. You can say, I'm really curious about this. I'd like to bring these kind of people together, and anybody can start, especially online. Anybody can run an online event. Anybody can run an online meetup, and that could be a really great resource for other people who are also curious about doing the same. So if you can't find one, you can always start your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to Josh's question in the question box in a second, but Yasmina and Jonathan touched on something really interesting there about BAME communities and Black Tech Fest. And something we've been considering or thinking a lot about recently is bias, particularly in recruitment processes. And I guess it is more targeted at you two, whether you've ever been concerned about biases in your career, and whether you have any kind of personal insights or learnings, advice, thoughts for people who may be on this webinar, who may be concerned about those elements when applying for jobs.
Yeah, I think it's a very real concern. And I was going to say something earlier because we were talking about fit and things like that. And I think there's a really, really dark, dangerous side to talking about fit in a very ethereal way. Is that it's a really easy route in for biases to play. And that was something that, for me, I think I have witnessed, and sometimes felt as well, like just a cultural disconnect that might then result in, so, you get marked down in a really like unknown black boxy kind of way, right? And I think that's something that, just as recruiters, I mean, I try to be very aware of that when I deal with recruitment processes. I'm sure everyone else here does as well. And I think in general, the happy news again is that probably in impact spaces, people are very hyper aware of these things. But I think I was just going to say, like, that's the only real dangerous thing. And, when you hear about, say, the classic was the Mckinsey airplane test, right? It's like, can you sit next to someone for 7 hours on an airplane, like as a colleague? And I'm like, well, how do you judge that? Because you can have a very good recruit and someone who would get along with your clients and get along with the rest of the team, but not get along with you, right? And then you don't have to be best friends to work well together. So yeah, that was what I was going to say. I think like that's where I think employers do need to continue to develop a lot of awareness to say, like, sometimes it's not just about this vague idea of fit, because that's where biases do come in.
Definitely. And I do think actually when you look at much bigger recruitment processes at the corporates, they have so many ways that they try and mitigate for that. They look at all the data of their thousands of applicants a year, and they really understand that. So I think when you're going into perhaps smaller environments, startups, scale-ups, that's something you do have to be very conscious of, understanding, how they measure people, looking at the existing teams, and looking at whether they advocate for the things that you care about. I know for me, I have to work for organizations that I see advocating for racial equality and social mobility. And I have chosen the organizations I've worked for, and specifically the bosses that I have worked for, on that basis, because I'm conscious that, as a young queer Black woman, that's something that I don't ever want to impact my career negatively. So I think it's just about trying to get to grips with, okay, what have they done? How is it evidence that they support the things that they say they do? Because every employer will say, oh, we welcome diverse applications, but try and look for what they've done, i.e. not just posting the Black Square on Instagram, but actually doing something about it. And that's always what I look for. And, would ask in an interview as well, like, oh, I noticed that you say that D&I is one of your key, qualities. I would really love to hear about what work you've done in this area. And, sometimes they'll say not much, but it's something we want to work on. Here are our plans. That for me would be sufficient, so long as I knew it was on the agenda.
I would say the last thing is, Yasmina hit the nail on the head. In terms of what are they doing as well? Look at the senior team, right? That for me is a big tell, because you see a lot of organizations that say they commit to it, and they're trying, right? So a lot of the junior team have a lot of diversity, but then somehow that doesn't translate to the senior team, and that sort of is I think a bit of a warning sign to say, okay, maybe there's something going on there. Maybe it's just taking some time. And as Yasmina said, I would ask about that, right? But also maybe there is something that's happening where there's extremely high attrition rate that's resulting in far less diversity at the top, right? So they're recruiting the diverse people, but they're not keeping them. And that's a very common problem, in many companies at the moment. But yeah, it's harder for it to judge with a startup, because again, sample size is so much smaller. But I think that's definitely a big tell for if you're looking at any, even just mid-sized organizations, really. Yeah.
It's a really interesting. Firstly, I'm just really glad that people are paying attention to it. We talk a lot about it at Escape. I feel very responsible as somebody who works with so many organizations to try to help to make sure that purposeful and interesting opportunities are genuinely open to everybody. And I think specifically, my personal opinion is the charity space particularly, and the startup space is probably two of the least diverse spaces, particularly because, as you say, Yasmina, they don't have the infrastructure in place to, they don't have to do the same reporting, they don't have the same processes, they don't have the same resource, they don't, they have the same accountability. And it's really, it is a problem. It's definitely a problem, and it's something that we're definitely really aware of, and are actively working on how do we make that actually just happen without people having to make an effort to make that happen. But it's something that I think people have to be aware of, and I always feel bad when I do this. I do a workshop on CVs and how to create a great CV, and I have some slides around protecting yourself from bias and being aware of bias, and people always say, oh, that's so awful, and it's it is awful, but it is also something that people need to be aware of, is something that happens, whether that is because you are of a different ethnicity or a different gender, or you are neurodiverse, or whatever difference you might be. If people overemphasis culture fit, that's something to be aware of, because it means people like me. And I think for us to kind of be aware of that as job seekers and career changes is also really important, because the worst thing is you end up somewhere that isn't friendly, or it isn't as inclusive as you want. So there are little things to pay attention to, as you've all said, which I think is really important. I'm conscious of time, so we're going to ask a few more questions. I have one here which I was also going to ask, so I'm glad somebody else has asked it, which is, if each of you in your own circumstance, or as people who are hiring or looking at applications, whether that's people applying for jobs or things that you've seen before, if you have suggestions of how people can stand out in a job application. So, this person has says, do video cover notes go down well? How much attention do people pay to CVs and how they're formatted? Or how, what would make you say, wow, if somebody did that in an application? Anybody who would be interested in sharing?
Yeah, this is a question I've honestly had so many times, because it was the number one question I got asked in my last role as well. And my answer has always been pretty much the same, which is that the ones that stand out are the ones that really show passion and are carefully crafted. You would be surprised how many applications, that someone who's a recruiter would read, where they're like, you can kind of tell that someone's just gone, yeah, this looks all right, and shut off the application with not really that much research into the business, without that much thought about the values, without that much thought about what they would bring to the organization. So really taking your time on applications and understanding why you are applying specifically to that role and specifically at that organization will help you to stand out. And that sounds quite basic, but it actually really will, because you will start to draw out all of your most important qualities. And then there are things like, making sure that you communicate in a way that sounds like you, that your voice, your tone comes through, not just writing in a really generic, boring business tone, but bringing your voice into what you write helps. And, if you get one of your friends or family or someone to read it and say, does this sound like me? That can be an easy way to check if that application is going to give a sense of who you are. So yeah, that would be my bit of advice there.
Yeah, I think also just to say, like, I totally understand that people apply to more than one job, right? And in fact, I would almost find it weird if someone came to me and said, oh, I applied to you guys and only you guys, right? Because people just don't do that, and I think it's fine at the early stages to have like a cursory idea and make the application. But as Yasmina says, I think by the time you reach, let's say, mid-stage interviews, what would really impress me is if someone, say, for example, read our full impact report and understood, the research methodology and understood the impact that we're making, right? Because that would just be like, oh, you've put in the time to learn about the organization in detail, not just read the tagline on the banner of our website, right? Because anyone can go on a website and do that. But if you spend, it's not even that much time, it's 15, 20 minutes, read and digest a report and can talk about it intelligently, that completely, sets you apart, in my mind, for me, just in terms of sheer effort, due diligence, and ability to understand. So yeah, I think there are things that you can do to like just make it a bit more of an effortful process, especially in the middle or later stages. I'm not as demanding, I guess. I don't, require that people do that in the first round, because again, I understand it's a funnel, right? It's a funnel for them, it's a funnel for us. But by the time you're getting down to the final couple of candidates, then yeah, I would really expect to see that.
Yeah, I guess our recruitment process is slightly different because we're focused more on you than how a little bit what you know about On Purpose, but more about you. But I think for me, it's evidence. So being concise in your application or in the questions you're responsive to do, but evidencing what you're talking about clearly and in a concise way. And just practicing just bringing your best examples, like really thinking what are your best examples of the work that you've done, and also providing a bit of like contextualizing these examples. So making it especially if you're coming from a different sector, making it as simple as possible for the person reading your CV to understand what you've done. So if you've driven revenue by 100 million, what's that in the context of the overall business? Or, it could be 10,000 in the context of 100. So really making it as easy as possible for the person reading your CV or cover letter, or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Nice. I think that's really, really all such good advice on how people can stand out, that kind of care and attention. And Hannah, to your point around being, I think it's really interesting. So I'm American, so I don't know. I feel like Americans find it easier to talk about how great they are. Sorry, no offense to any Americans. I've been living in the UK for 12 years, so I feel like I've adopted some of the habits, but I find people really hesitate to talk about their achievements in a way that is, there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. And for me, confidence is just being really clear and proud of what you've done. And arrogance is often like over-egging what you've done, or trying to have that as like you're then better than other people. And I think often people aren't confident enough about what they've done, and we should be proud of it, because those are the things that people want to know about. Being clear about the impact that you've had, the value that you've created does have quite a big impact, and everybody's had an impact in their work. I think maybe people don't talk about it enough, especially in the context of jobs, is, you want to come across as being confident, and it's very rare that somebody comes across as being arrogant. So I would say people should push a little bit more on trying to be clear about the value and what they've done. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think leading on from that, Hannah, I just wanted to come back to you on that talented generalist point. And I think to sort of round off the discussion, say you've got into this purposeful career and you've arrived at your sort of dream organization, or even in the context of On Purpose, you would see so many, say, talented generalists come through your pipeline. And I just wanted to delve into that a bit more about how people who may identify with that designation can then use their transferable skills that they've picked up from their previous career to demonstrate their value, more whether in the workplace or on a program such as On Purpose. So
just wanted, so how they can demonstrate their skills, like whilst they're on the program, or? Yeah, I think sort of how they translate. It kind of comes back to sort of people not being so certain of what their skill set can lead to, or how it can be useful in a workplace or say on a placement, and just how they can kind of utilize those. Yeah, I think so many. I think if you've had any career, so many of the skills, I don't know if this is the best answer, but so many of the skills you have are so, and what I see on the program, we have people that have been teachers, we've got an ex-police detective, we've got lawyers, management, like such a broad range of people all going into different organizations and being able to use their skills. And I think just so many of the skills we have are just quite simple, like, being able to ask good questions. A lot of, if you do come from a different career background, sometimes the value that an organization will get out of you is just somebody that does have a bit of a different perspective on an old problem. And we, I guess, to give some more practical examples, if you're an ex-lawyer, you're likely to have good writing skills. That's applicable in lots of different circumstances. If you're from a finance background, you're very analytical. You could be good at measuring carbon emissions, things like that. There's lots of ways that we see through the associate program that people transfer these inherent skills they have in other areas. For me, I guess it's quite interesting. Like when I was in advertising, a lot of the work that I was doing was like managing people or problem solving, and at the time I really didn't value the skills that I have. But now that I'm using them in a context where I'm actually helping people and I really, really value them. So sometimes you can rediscover or reconnect with the skills that you do have in an environment where you're happy. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what. Yeah, sorry, this is a bit not a well-worded question, but I think that's really interesting for people to hear.
Great.
Sky, I think we've got one more.
Yeah, we're going to ask one last question to round off, which is we have a list of about 50 questions that we could ask you, which is always the problem. But I guess the question that I'd like to ask each of you is just if there's anything that we haven't discussed related to this topic of getting into purposeful career, making that change, making it work for you, that we haven't talked about, that's really important to you, that you would like to, give some advice about or touch on before we log off. I would love to hear what that might be, if there's anything, or if you don't have something that we haven't touched on, if you have a parting piece of advice that you'd like to give to everybody who's watching.
I wouldn't presume to be able to give advice to people, but I think for me, just to share a personal thing, it's like when I was making the jump from, so what had happened with Greater Change was that at the start, my co-founder Alex was full-time, but I was actually just volunteering part-time whilst I was working as a consultant. So I'll be, contributing on the evenings and weekends when I can. And sort of when I sort of decided to jump ship full-time, I think very naturally a huge part of the calculus became like, actually there's quite a lot of risk to this, I feel, because and especially when you're about to make the jump is when it's scariest, right? When you feel all of that potential risk hitting you, where you're like, oh, what if it goes under in half a year? What am I going to do? You're giving up potentially, if you're working in the city now, if audience of people working in the city right now, you're giving up a career where you're very steadily going to hit, the best part of £1 million per annum in terms of salary, probably at some point in your career. So giving all of that up is going to feel risky. And I think the big thing to understand is that actually, I don't think there's that much risk anymore, right? I think perceptions are changing. The way your for-profit industries are viewing non-profit industries is changing. So the fact that, you spend 2 years working on a project, like if any of you joined Greater Change for 2 years, I would have thought that in 2 years' time, if you left and tried to go back into the city again, that experience would be viewed quite favorably, right? Because the things that you'd be doing would be pretty cool, will be pretty relevant, it'll teach you loads of skills. So I think it's really, really important to just say that actually, don't overplay the risks in your head, because I did that. And actually, it's not entirely risk-free, right? I'm not gonna, say that, but I think nowadays the risk is a lot smaller than it might seem, right before you make the jump. So yeah, that's just a personal little anecdote that I thought would be interesting to share.
I completely agree, Jonathan. I definitely was afraid to leave the stability and comfort of where I was at. But I think if you know what you want to get out of your career move, then it will never be time wasted. If you're like, right, I'm going to move into this job, and I know that in this next year, I just want to learn as much as possible about X, Y, Z. Here are my goals, and I'm just going to see how it goes. Like, the worst case scenario is still probably not bad. And I think just, taking away some of that fear and just making very calculated, sensible decisions and taking a leap where you know that you're going to get something out of it. And that would be my advice.
I think my advice very quickly would be not to get hung up on what is my purpose, what is my mission in life, what is the one thing that I am meant to do. The reality is most people, or a lot of people, don't know exactly what they're supposed to do, and most people don't have a purpose for their whole life. Just think about what is going to be interesting for you in the next 2 to 3 years. I'm totally copying this from my CEO, by the way. This is not coming from me. Just think about where what's going to interest you in the next 2 to 3 years, and then you can always change after that. Break it down, because otherwise it can feel very overwhelming, and you can get caught up in your own narcissism, for want of a better word, and not make the change.
Amazing, wonderful advice. Such good insights, great stories. I mean, each of your stories are super inspiring to me personally, but I have no doubt to everyone else who's watching this. And I guess the last thing for us to say really is to say thank you so much to each of you for being here and sharing, and just so grateful for your time and all of the wisdom, which I've taken many post-it notes here. I've got many post-its written down. And to those who are watching, thank you so much for being here. Just so everyone knows, there's not very much time left, but there's a little networking thing on the left-hand side. And if you want, as soon as we stop broadcasting on the stage, you can hop over there, and there's chat roulette where you can have a conversation with somebody else for a few minutes if you want to meet some other people. We'll share the recording tomorrow. We'll share contact details for all the different organizations we've heard from this evening, and potentially maybe their LinkedIn details, so you can have a look. There's all sorts of cool stuff going on with each of these organizations. So just want to say we will send that out. And a huge thank you to Jonathan, Yasmina, and Hannah, and Jake for being here this evening. And thanks to everybody who's watching. So hope everyone has a great evening, and we will see you at the next one.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.